Hi, everyone. Hopefully last night was fun. Everybody's a little coffeeed up for the first session of the day. Anybody looking forward to this, or is this another one? OK, great. Cool. So before we get started, I'm sure everybody is very intrigued about talking about healthcare innovations. It's a topic that's near and dear to us. So I thought before I get started, I don't have do you have a clicker that I can get? Sorry, I didn't get one. My bad. It's early morning. I might have needed more coffee. I forgot my clicker back there. Thank you. OK, perfect. So before we got started, I thought I'll give a little bit of a very 30-second kind of a brief overview of why I'm here, why I'm talking to you on the stage. I belong from an analyst organization, Everest Group. We cover the healthcare industry across enterprises, technology service providers, and a lot of the industry ecosystem partners, McKinsey's, BCG's, all the major consulting firms, with the intent of talking about actually topics like innovation and technology in healthcare. How do we use it? How do we utilize it? So before I get started with the content, I had a quick question for everyone. So when you think about technology and innovation, what's the one technology or two technologies that come to your top of your mind that has really changed healthcare in the last 10, 15 years? Any big ones that can come? Sure. Sorry? iPhone. Wow, nice. Any others? Wearables? Perfect. What about something low tech, something which is clear and closer to the hospitals that you work with very closely? Electronic health records, yeah? So who here thinks EHRs and EMRs have delivered the promise that was started early 2010, 12 kind of an era? Is the experience really that great? Are we happy with the EHR, EMR? What do you typically hear from the providers? Perfect. So that is the sentiment in the industry. So yes, this is a comic strip, but it is very close to reality. When EHRs fail, you have to go back to the paper record. Everybody rejoices. Not the state that we want to be in the industry, but unfortunately, that is the reality of the business. We deploy a lot of technology. It doesn't really get utilized. We don't really see the same enthusiasm and adoption once it's out there, as opposed to when we were kind of getting in. So what I'm hoping to do today is talk about a little bit more about, okay, what are some of those innovations, and how can we actually continue that enthusiasm beyond just the initial concept stages of technology and carry them forward towards implementation? What would it take for technology to really deliver the promise that we originally started from, as opposed to just being a fancy PowerPoint slide, another one of these presentations somewhere else in the industry? Let me get started. So when you think about the key imperatives driving most business decisions in healthcare, we do this study. We interview 100-plus healthcare enterprises every quarter. These are the three biggest things that came out when we did this about a couple of months ago. The biggest factor by far is about security, right? Help me keep my data secure, help me keep my privacy intact. That is one of the biggest business challenges today. The second one is, by every means, a stretch of the word, everybody wants to be in Medicare Advantage. That's the thing to be in. And third, how do I deliver better customer experience? Better experience for my members, better for my patients, better for my providers, better for any other organization, entities, be it brokers, TPAs, intermediaries, anybody else I'm operating with. So how do I design a better experience? That's the three big business trends and challenges that face every healthcare organization. So I'm going to deep dive a little bit into what does that mean. So first, security, right? No surprises. We've seen too many breaches in the industry. Unfortunately, the cost of an average breach in healthcare is almost twice of what you see in any other industry. So this is the reason why breaches become so sensitive. Every time there's a healthcare data breach, there's a security issue, we get extra sensitive about it. And whatever we were supposed to take as a couple of steps forward on technology, we take a few of them back. So it doesn't help, because a lot of the innovation that I talked about earlier, then they don't really go anywhere. We end up taking too many back steps, because every time we're going to implement something new, something's going to break, and we're too worried about the breakages as opposed to actually the power of technology. But how do we resolve it? Because we obviously don't want technology breaking on us either. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next section. Medicare Advantage, no surprises, a lot of investments, a lot more enrollments, a lot more adoption. People who are eligible, they're starting to enroll in Medicare Advantage a lot more. But even more importantly, This is the moneymaker place for most plans. Arguably, some of the highest profits happen in Medicare Advantage. So there's a lot of reasons to be more excited about this market, and hence we see a lot more of the industry investing at least towards Medicare Advantage. Whether you're a plan or a hospital, this is the sector you want to be in. And finally, experience. So again, based on the results of the survey, 200 plus healthcare insurance executives, increasing member satisfaction was the topmost. The second one was about provider satisfaction. So the expectations on experience in industry is going up. A lot of this is also driven by some of the stuff that we've been seeing in other industries. So think of your experience in e-commerce. You mentioned iPhone was one of the biggest turning points in the industry. How much utilization do we have? How much adoption do we have for health-related stuff through iPhones? We haven't scratched the surface compared to what we see in other industries. Think of how your experience on travel has changed. Think of how e-commerce has changed. How has healthcare really changed? How has iPhone changed healthcare in the last 10, 15, 20 years? It has, but not to the same extent. And that's what the expectation that, okay, if I can book a flight online in 10 minutes, if I can buy anything on Amazon in 5 minutes, why can't I do something on the healthcare side? Why does it take me years, months to kind of resolve some of my healthcare issues, right? Why does it take me so much hoops to kind of get through to a provider or get some of the critical surgeries that I might need? Why is it such a cumbersome process? And especially if I get stuck with a bill, which God knows how I'm gonna clarify that part of it. So there's a huge expectation on patient and member experience, but as an industry, we just haven't delivered on it. But it is one of the biggest business imperative. So let's flip over to the technology side of it. So we talked about the business imperatives. Now the question becomes, how can technology help me solve for some of these things? We have all been doing the manual way of doing these things for years, but there are a lot of solutions out there that we can do. But then there's also a lot of problems that comes with those solutions. So first one is obviously analytics. We keep talking about data. We keep talking about unlocking the insights from that data. The data volume has grown. Our data lakes and the investment, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has made some form of investments in getting their data right. But how much value have you really been able to unlock from that data? Okay. That's where a lot of the analytics problems and a lot of the analytics issues are today. Similarly, cybersecurity. To my earlier point, we keep seeing a lot of threats. We've implemented DevOps. We've implemented security architecture. The breaches just continue to rack on. Interoperability. We have now some industry standards starting to come up, right? But it's been years, we haven't still been able to truly integrate our data across organizations. Our systems don't talk to each other, our data does not interact, we still don't have one unified view of everything that's happening with our patients. And finally, generative AI. I'm going to go a lot more deeper into it, have a focus section on it, but again, the headline there is ChatGPT hit the scene 2 years ago, almost to the date. There's a lot of promise on ChatGPT and the power of generative AI that's going to unlock for us. 2 years later, what do we have to show for it? A bunch of failed POCs and pilots. That's it. So what's going to take for generative AI to really deliver on some of those promises, and where is it likely to deliver those promises? So let's get started. So I want to talk about the 5 Ps today. The prerequisite of interoperability, how do you drive productivity through AI automation, personalizing a member experience, focusing on privacy security, and then finally, what will it take for us to promote the next-gen technologies like AI? I'm going to do a quick poll. From an interoperability perspective, there's like 4 options here. Which of these do you feel is the most pressing issue for your organization today? So again, we're going to go low tech here because, again, I don't trust my tech. So let's take a quick show of hands. Who believes amongst these 4, the biggest issue for you is data integration? Is data integration the biggest interoperability challenge compared to other 3 options here? Phasing out legacy systems, standardization, data quality. Quick show of hands. Who here feels interoperability? Few people. Phasing out legacy systems. Getting rid of your old core tech. Okay? Standardization of data. Making it work across seamlessly. Finally, the quality of data, either missing information, incomplete information. There you go. So it seems like the most amount of hands went out on data quality as an issue, right? We're still talking about, 10, 12 years of cloud migration, data standardization, data journeys. And still most people here feel data quality continues to be the biggest issue. But the other issues are equally important as well. So how do we solve for it? So the primary thing I wanted to call out here is the technology already exists. I think we are beyond a point where we're saying, okay, the technology is a challenge. The cloud solutions exist, the APIs exist, the automation layer exists. I don't think we are going to necessarily come out with the next breakthrough in any of these technologies tomorrow that's going to tell us that, okay, hey, guess what? Now we have something cool that can solve for all of those issues that I mentioned. The challenge is not with the technology. The challenge is with the adoption. A lot of times we get into a very puristic technology implementation. We deploy the technology thinking that it's going to come. We deploy the EHRs thinking the meaningful use is going to happen. 12 years later, yes, the good thing about EHRs was we digitized everything. What do we have to show for it? Most hospitals, most providers, most physicians still feel EHR, EMR is a pain. The cartoon strip I had in the first slide, a lot of providers, trust me, they would love to go back to the old school way of doing the paper-based EHRs, EMRs. But yes, there is value that we unlocked here, but it took us over a decade to get to that value point, and we still haven't gotten to the meaningful use of it. We still haven't unlocked the power of data, despite 12 years of EHR, EMR implementations. So the fundamental progress we need to make on is not the technology front. The technology exists. It's all around us. Ask around, I'm sure your peers in the room already have used it in different shapes and form. The challenge is in terms of how do we make our organization ready? How do we utilize the technology? So the next few sections I'm going to focus on what will it take for us to get there. Let me talk about the productivity part of it. This is the place where we have seen probably the most progress when it comes to technology adoption, especially forms of AI and automation. So this is a quick view in terms of when you think about the major processes involved in a classic health insurance kind of an ecosystem, from network management to clinical to claims to other areas, where do we see the role of technology? The good news here is most of these you see at least some form of deployment, some form of technology adoption. In many cases, the technology is starting to create a real big impact. So the first big mistake that we have made with some new next-gen technologies, we haven't selected the right use cases. It took us, 10, 15 years almost to make automation work well. It's still the adoption rate, if you look at it, and if I average all of these numbers, it's still going to be in the 25, 30, 40% range. But we're now at a point where we know where automation is going to work. When do I want to do an RPA implementation and intelligent document processing, maybe AI-enabled intelligent automation? So there's a lot of use cases in the industry that we can deploy across our ecosystem. So, but good news is 10, 12, 15 years of trying and testing, we've landed at a point where we know where technology can work and where it is likely to create value. So what would that implementation roadmap look like? So to my earlier point, if you just deploy the technology hoping the business will use it, a lot of the times that's one of the biggest failure points. A lot of the technology sits on its shelf despite millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, because we did not realize how it is going to get consumed in the front end. So the first, I think, the mistake, the big challenge that we made, I think this group also said here, is the quality of data itself. Then it becomes the quantification of ROI. How do I identify the right use case? How do I identify the right place where I'll get the right ROI from my technology investments? And then the best practices, which has really helped the AI and automation journey, when it comes to technology, again, first get your data right. Garbage in, garbage out. We've been hearing 5, 7, 10 years of this comment being made. It still exists. There's still a lot of garbage in our healthcare data. If you don't clean it out, none of these tools are going to work for you. The examples I had on the previous slide, the reason they work is because a lot of the data cleansing around some of the basics of this has been done. There's a reason claims is in green, because that's the pain point of the industry. We focus a lot of time and energy in cleaning our claims data. We still haven't done it to clinical as much. We definitely haven't done it in our provider network contracts and credentialing and all the data management stuff. So that's where the next big opportunities are going to come from. Then the business case part of it. It can't be a technology implementation, the business will come. Think about what are the processes, what are the use cases that are really going to help you drive efficiency? Where do we have very heavy manual processes where automation can really create a dent? How do you define the right metrics? I'm going to talk about the metrics towards the end as well, but having the business and technology aligned on the same metrics as opposed to technology's metrics being about, okay, deployment and the business being about consumption. A lot of times when those two meet, we don't see the needle move. Technologists have a very different view of, okay, hey, I'm going to deploy the technology and how is it going to utilize. When the business consumers start using it, they realize half of this tech does not solve my problem. I can't use this. Let me throw another couple of hundred bodies at this problem and try to solve it the old school way. So again, conflict between technology and the business, which we could have resolved had we gotten to the business casing a lot sooner. And then finally, implementation, no kind of rocket science there. There's a lot of pilot programs. I'm going to talk about that again in the context of generative AI and other technologies, but there's a lot of pilot programs that we tried, we tested, we track it, and we improve the technology. Works over time. But again, AI automation, we have done this, at least the automation part of it, we have done this for the last 10, 15 years. There's enough testing that has happened. Okay. I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to take a quick pause and see if there's any questions so far. We're going to make this more lively session. I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot more participation from the audience. If there's any questions, feel free to stop me. I will try and take those along the way. But I'm going to do one more, which is personal member engagement, before I take a pause. So, as I said, by far, this is one of the top 3 business priorities. We want to engage our members. We want to create better experiences for them. So if you think about the typical journey of a member or a patient, it goes through multiple touch points. Obviously, we talk about administration a lot. This is where enrollment, we are entering open enrollment. So there's a lot of conversations around this right now. So what do you do with the enrollment touch point? That's obviously one big piece of it, whether it's eligibility, re-enrollment, verification, all of those things. There's also the clinical and care part of it. There's a lot of focus from the industry on how do I drive better clinical outcomes. But then there's also a lot of these other touch points, right? Services, appeals, grievances, right? Whether it's with providers, whether it's with direct patients in case of wrongful billing, dual enrollments, a lot of complications in the industry. Eventually billing and payments, and then finally sales, marketing, lead generation, how do you kind of, how do you get your plans out in the market, how do you onboard onto the exchange plans, et cetera, et cetera. The good news is across the board, from a use case and from an application perspective, AI has sweeping applications. So again, to my earlier point, the challenge is not in terms of where can I use technology or is the technology ready? It's a question of, okay, how do I get it done? So what do we typically see enterprises that have actually been successful in technology deployments? What are some common points? So what you see on the left side here is what are some of the core pillars. So these are the hygiene factors. When I'm thinking of implementation of good technology, more robust technology tools, I think of omnichannel. We've tried it, we've tested this technology works, we know we can create those unified experiences. This is like a kind of a must-have in the industry today. Again, there's still going to be 2 schools of thoughts in terms of, hey, if I'm mostly serving my Medicare population, do they really care about it? But trust me, there's enough applications of the omnichannel beyond just the Medicare population, and even for them. Will it really have the same uptake as opposed to some of the other industries? Probably not. But even in healthcare context, omnichannel is extremely important. And as the technology is mature, it's extremely accessible right now. Transparency, personalized communication, again, very accessible. Digital scheduling, and then finally, cloud-based contact centers and AI-enabled chatbots. All of these are services which are extremely well deployed. Peers in your peers in your industry are doing it left, right, center. What we don't see as much is solving for the business issues that is on the right. This is what separates more pioneers in the industry from those who are kind of a Me Too player. So companies who are starting to think about, okay, how do I deliver better care coordination and care outcomes, and hence design the technology towards it, they end up achieving more success. Similarly, telehealth became all the rave during COVID. All of us were all gung-ho upon that, hey, telehealth is the future. 3 years later, a lot of the telehealth stuff has kind of slowed down, but it has now reached a point where we know it is stable. It hasn't gone down to the pre-COVID level. So we know that there's enough use cases of telehealth. So how do we enable it? Right? The huge upswing during the COVID era is done. So now we can take a more pragmatic approach around, okay, if I'm doing telehealth, who am I doing it for? Which patients will really have the need for it? When will they have the need? How do I identify it? And then how do I enable the interactions? Then the cost estimators, the digital payments tool, all of these are helpful use cases to think through. And the sooner you think about these use cases, rather than just going to the technology implementation, the better the outcome's gonna look like. Okay, I'm gonna take a pause now and see if there are any questions so far, any interesting thoughts, ideas that come from the room. How have your organizations been thinking about implementation? How much of this is about, okay, hey, we're gonna deploy some technology versus here are the use cases that I'm really looking to power. So any interesting use cases that anybody wants to share in the room, or anybody has any questions around some particular use case that I discussed so far? Okay, any hands? I see a few nods. People are still thinking through the use cases that they really want to share, or you're still thinking that some of your use cases might not be there up on the slides yet? There's a lot more slides coming.
I'll throw you a bone.
Okay.
Telehealth use case. I get where you're going with the slide and what you're trying to present. I think technology still has to come a long way to create less friction. We went through 2 implementations for our telehealth services, and I think the access to it when it works is really useful, but the process to get to that point where you can use it, it's not as seamless as maybe just picking up the phone and calling your doctor and setting an appointment.
Yeah.
And so I think there's still opportunity to kind of like, how do you make that so that it is so seamless to a member? And when it works really well, and I've had good implementations with telehealth services, but the eligibility and enrollment, just making, verifying, dependents, they show up on there. Like, when those don't work, it just throws a bad taste, and I think that's why you've seen such a decline in some of the usage in that space. I know it was meant to be the godsend for everything, but I'm not sure. I think there's another evolution of telehealth that maybe isn't MD Live and Teledoc, that maybe is more incorporated into doctors' offices, that maybe needs to come, but just kind of personal preference. Just the reason why I have the example is I tried to use it the other day, and it didn't work. I had to help my wife navigate the system, and it took hours before I could finally get her to talk to somebody on the phone. So it's one of those where technology has to work on demand, and when it doesn't, it's super frustrating. Even the chatbot services, I can't stand chatbot because the delay between the person talking to me is not immediate, and those long delays in silence, I'm constantly sending, "Are you still there? Are you still there? Are you still there?" And the constant going back and forth. Because the problem with the chatbot services is you tend to use it while you're doing something else, and so you need immediate feedback as you're going through there. So I think there's an opportunity in the technology sector space to say, how do we make this, meet people where they're at? Because we have, Amazon is so quick. I can hit purchase now. Literally, that purchase ends up with the delivery within a few hours where I live. So the fact that it took me over 3 hours to get a telehealth service representative, in contrast to somebody delivering a product, was a big difference. And I think that's the comparison we're up against. Technology in healthcare is up against technology in the commercial retail space, and it's a really hard comparison to make, even though that everybody's making that comparison. So, anyway.
So if you really think about it, the reason why, again, if I go back to telehealth, the reason why we still see a lot of the use cases falling flat, one of them is we would design telehealth to solve a point-in-time need, which was, hey, we are during COVID, nobody can access facilities, or they don't want to access facilities because they don't want to contract COVID, and hence let's design it for that problem. So what we did during the 2020, 2021 era is basically just slap a great user interface on top of a rudimentary technology. Telehealth was largely basically Zoom. That's what we were doing. We were scheduling scheduling a bunch of things, and then we were having people on Zoom just kind of doing some doctor pre-checks and follow-ups, and to determine that what would that first level of triaging look like. That was basically the first version of telehealth in many ways. What we're now realizing is that first use case is now long gone, and we're stuck with the technology. The rest of the tools exist, but we never really implemented those. We implemented a shell of a technology. We said, okay, we're going to have this fancy interface. We're going to allow people to book their appointments, log on to Zoom, and kind of interact with their doctors, physicians, nurses, etc. But what's really powering it? When somebody logs in, how do I know their medical history? How do I know what they're kind of going through? How do I know what kind of access they have to pharmacies and drugs in their neighborhood? A lot of those issues we never really solved for. The fundamental technology, and again, I think a lot of this will go back to the data part of it. The data and the technology does exist, but we just never designed it to solve those pieces. And the other big thing that we've missed is the consumer journeys have moved on. Right? We don't update those as frequently as a retail example. The biggest power that the Amazons of the world have is not the fact that they have the best tech, is that they have so much data flowing through their system and they continuously use it to see what the user expectations of experience are. Every time I log in and I buy something, the Amazon is taking that data and trying to figure out, okay, what can I tell the customer that is going to make them more likely to buy this, or is going to make their experience better? How do I get them from 3 clicks down to 2 clicks down to 1 click so that they can get to the product they want and they can have a faster checkout experience? So a lot of those things we've never really thought about in healthcare. Healthcare is a point-in-time need. When somebody comes, we'll try and figure these things out, but we never use the data to figure out, okay, why are they coming into the first place and how do I make their experience faster, more seamless? So a lot of those issues is where we have the tech, we have the data, but we're just not unlocking the power of it. So, which brings me to the more controversial subject, right? Privacy, security. Again, the biggest issue, biggest area where a lot of the technology gets limited, to my earlier point, a lot of the step backs that we take. So I'm going to, again, do like a quick audience poll here. If you think about 2 options here, simple. Unlike the last one, the 4, here's 2 options. What would your firm's posture be, whether it is about going for high functionality, getting a lot of third-party applications, great productivity, great efficiency, but potentially exposes you to vulnerability and third-party threats? But at the same, and the other option being absolutely no vulnerability, but at the same time, you're not going to get any of the fancy technologies, tools, applications. You're going to be protected, but you're going to have almost no functionality, very low tech, very old school way of doing things. Show of hands. Who thinks high functionality, but potential vulnerability is the way to go? There could be a few. A lot of people prefer the functionality. It's not a trick question or rhetorical one. Okay, couple of hands, but not a lot. Low vulnerability, I'm assuming everybody else. Sorry? Fair enough. But does it really put you out of business? So the biggest data breach that we had this year was, obviously everybody knows it. I think it's on my next slide. Yeah. But did any of the organizations go out of business? Yeah, obviously this market reputation takes a hit. If you're listed, your stock prices take a hit. Are you really going out of business? Is your life very different, except for a bunch of those mailers that had to be sent out next day, alerting everybody of data breaches? There's a lot of regulatory scrutiny that happens. But did it really change anything in terms of how Change Healthcare operates its business, in terms of how they deploy the data security and architecture and all? Have you really seen any major changes happen in the last few months after the breach happened? I'm assuming a lot of people here have worked with Change, right? Has there been any real on-the-ground change? Has anybody gone out of business because of this?
I mean, the assumption is that big companies are especially the smaller organizations with less revenue.
Okay.
I'm sure, and just me being in the industry and
Sure.
being in cybersecurity, being around companies that pay attention, definitely why this is because of ransomware. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly the sentiment in the industry. And again, I don't disagree with any of it, right? That is the reason that we get very sensitized about the data security part of it, the cybersecurity, the data threats. We really don't want to kind of take even one step wrong, which is a great thing to do. But the historical way for us to think about it has been that, okay, this is a trade-off. If you want the functionality, you will have to risk with the vulnerabilities. I would rather not do this at all. I would rather keep my data architecture secure and not worry about the functionality. I can live with low tech, I can live with low functionality, as long as my security does not get hampered. What I'm here to challenge is, this is not a win-loss situation. You can actually use technology in a way that can actually improve your data security architectures. So, and this is where the next-gen technology really becomes a lot more important. So I'm going to focus disproportionately on AI and what it can do for it, but keep that undertone in mind that in a lot of the privacy security settings and a lot of the data interoperability, security, cyber threats and all, there's a lot of applications for pieces like AI and other next-gen technology to help you create that win-win situation. It does not need to be that, okay, if I want high functionality and third-party applications, I will be risking my data. You can actually do it in a way where you can win on both counts. So first and foremost, if you think about the technology realm, this exponential leverage of technology all around. From the more ideation phases of quantum computing, generative AI, computational computing, there's a lot more of those which are still in ideation stage, versus if you think about some of the more mature technologies out there, from blockchain to 5G, edge computing, low code, no code, a lot of those are a lot more mature, and we're starting to see wide scale applications and deployments. So, and again, one can argue in terms of the adoption within healthcare versus some of the other industries, but across the board, even within healthcare, we're seeing a lot of this. We'll go more deeper into the AI part of it, but just from a technology perspective, there's a lot more options available, and a lot of these options can help you create win-win situations. So when we talked about, again, going back to the enterprise key issue service that we run every quarter, the biggest pieces that come out in terms of priority, no surprise, cybersecurity is number one. Used to be number two. Again, one incident happens, suddenly jumps up the rank. So, and unfortunately in this industry, we have an incident happening pretty much every few months. So this ranking continues to stay in the top 1, 2. If it slips 2 or 3, call me. I'll love to know why it happened and how it happened. It hasn't slipped to 3 in at least the last several years I've been tracking this market. Obviously, the next ones after that is going to be cloud solutions. We love our cloud. We've deployed a lot of things. We've migrated a lot of the applications, a lot of our data, a lot of our systems to cloud. The challenge has been about, okay, once we migrate, what do we do next? That's where a lot of the technology companies in the industry that you see, they're trying to challenge the status quo and say, okay, we've done the migration, but that was step 1. We've done the migration. Now we have our data in a system where we can start tapping into it. We can drive more insights. But you still need to enable a lot of the layers on top of it for you to drive more meaningful use out of it, which is where advanced automation, data analytics, and then eventually AI and generative AI start becoming. So these are the priorities for the healthcare enterprise in terms of where they see most of their investments going in the next 6 to 12 months. Any surprises here? Anything that is not called out in the list that you believe is a very large priority for your organization outside these 5? Okay, sounds we're mostly aligned. So let's talk about the promise of generative AI first. So we did this study in 2023, early part of last year. So this is what the promise of generative AI was. Industry-wise, healthcare was supposed to be the second highest adopter. There's a lot of applications of generative AI. What you see on the right side is various use cases where we were expecting generative AI to really take off, right? So as you can expect, a lot of these use cases are more in your front end. How do you service your members and patients better? How do you kind of market to them better? How do you do some of your then IT and technology differently? I think there were comments and quotes made famously about generative AI that it's going to eliminate the need for engineering and software development. Everybody in our life is going to become a software developer, right? Because all you need to know is you need to be expert at English. Fast forward 2 years, now we are seeing many more software engineer roles, which were never heard of, being developed, right? Prompt engineering, none of us heard about it till a couple of years ago. Now suddenly it's all the rave. Everybody's starting to become an expert in it. So again, I'm not here to say that generative AI is not going to fulfill these promises, but not at the pace we set out for. So when we think about the real application of generative AI, where it is starting to credibly create an impact, the biggest one is about how do I have, what existing digital tools I have, not about deploying new ones, and kind of extract more utilization out of it, right? So famously, we call it AI gets a UI, right? So you get a lot of your applications, a lot of your digital systems, a lot of your automation tools that have been sitting there, they've been trying to deliver value. How can you squeeze more efficiency out of them? How do you start using your digital tools more? How do you make sure that your organization, your business users, your front-end agents, they get to hear about the tools that they have and using AI to kind of access those? The second one, again, very common use case, we're seeing a huge adoption on this, is knowledge latency. there's knowledge gaps, right? It could be in your front end. For our industry, one of the biggest problems in the industry is we've grown through several acquisitions. There's so many different organizations have come together. Every organization comes with its own systems, 20 different data systems who don't really talk to each other. And then when somebody wants to kind of get access to us, whether it's a provider or a member calling us, wants to get access to some basic information, on the back end, your team is probably flipping through 10 different systems to figure out, okay, where does that right information lie, right? Very common problem statement that we see. So the library card effect is what the AI, generative AI, can create for you. Parsing through all of those systems in the back end and creating a well-refined summary on using the generative component to guide your agent. Again, I'm not here to tell you that we can eliminate the agents or we can do this directly through AI, but can you make your agents, can you make your frontline a lot faster? And then there's other knowledge graphs, right? There's other ways to kind of bring the knowledge gaps in our enterprises together. So there's a lot of knowledge-related use cases that are starting to become popular from a generative AI perspective. But one of the common themes that we saw was most AI applications are either about velocity, about how fast I need to move, or versus about change, which is how do I need to restructure my organization. And it seems like the velocity part, the fast movement, the faster go-to-market are the places where we're seeing a slightly better adoption compared to the change use cases because, again, change is hard. So this is a quote from, or rather like a summary of quote from some of the CIOs in the industry. So when you think about the applications of AI and generative AI, what people are really focusing on is the micro utilities, use cases where you can drive productivity as opposed to sweeping change management issues. So how can I get more productivity out of my existing use cases, out of my existing data, out of my existing agents, as opposed to trying to fundamentally change my technology architecture. And that's a place where the business value is more immediate. You don't get to see ROIs that, okay, I'm going to deploy AI and generative AI. 3 years later, we'll talk about how did it work. You can start seeing the value being created almost immediately. And that drives a lot more confidence in the ability to do it. So what are those use cases? Now, here's a bit of a bad news. We saw huge POCs in generative AI in the last 18 months. Everything, so this is a whole repository and there's a lot more. We just handpicked a few top ones. Most of this, as you can see, the proof of concept, the POCs exist. As you start moving to proof of value and then eventually proof of scale and production, things start slowing down. Right? I do want to put a caveat. This is a slightly dated view. It is about 3 to 6 months old. We were more refreshing this, and we have started to now see some users actually reach production. But I think the conversation has shifted from last year where what can I do from a POC perspective to where can I actually start seeing scale up. And we're starting to see some early evidences where you can actually see scaled up application of generative AI. The few examples I took on a couple of slides ago, the knowledge management use cases, the customer success use cases, those are definitely the popular ones, but then there's a lot of other things we can do in our mid and back office as well. Any questions, any surprises on the list, any generative AI use cases that people here in the room have experimented with, they have seen the proof of scale, they are starting to see production? How many in the room have actually seen generative AI work and create value? 1, 2, 3. In others' experiences, what hasn't been working? What's been the biggest challenge? I'm sure everybody's experimented with it, or at least your organizations have. So why is it not creating the value that we expected it to create when ChatGPT first came out? Sorry?
I think the main thing is capturing the voice of personalization on top of the graphics.
Okay.
It adds that element of touch. And today, unless you put a layer over it, which we can do like this, I think right now what it does is it spits out the right answer for any question you may have in the customer service inquiry you may have. But it still feels very a little hard. And I think sometimes you can add in an element that creates the human touch and softness, even if it's still a lot of AI.
Okay. So it's about getting it a little more human-like feel, right? Are you thinking this more from an end patient member perspective, or even for your own teams to use it?
Yeah, I think it's in a variety of ways. I think it's one of the best service metrics,
Sure.
particularly use cases and even answering the services that they use, search systems,
Yeah.
software use. Yeah, it's just, it can be across the board.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So I want to do a quick summarization of where we then stand from an industry perspective, right? So on the generative AI, as we heard, I don't know if the voice reached out, but I think the idea here is how do you make generative AI feel less artificial, right? Less AI. How do you make it a little more human-like so the consumption is better, whether it's your own teams using it, whether it's your patients or members kind of consuming it, how do you make it feel more natural? I'm sure everybody has had experiences here of kind of being bounced around with conversational AIs and bots and online IVR systems. Right? You don't want generative AI to have the same experience. You don't want it to feel artificial. It should not become another bottleneck for you to reach out to your healthcare provider, and you have to jump through 5 different hoops before you land there. So that's where a lot of those things become, right? Okay, how do you kind of mimic the personalized experience? So the first thing that I want to kind of call out is, for healthcare enterprises, one of the biggest things right now is how do I improve the velocity of change? So how do I move faster, right? Whether it's my go-to-market, whether I want to launch new plans, whether I need to process claims faster, whether I need to deliver faster clinical care coordination services. So how do I deliver things faster as opposed to fundamentally changing my organization, my product mix, my structure? The change is one of the velocity is one of the biggest thing that is driving a lot of the tech adoption in the industry. The second one, which I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of friction between technology and ops. The technology is all puristic. It's about, okay, deploy the tech. This is the really cool, shiny object effect. I really want access to generative AI. I really want AI. I really want cloud, everything. But then where is the consumption going to happen? Unless you get that friction down, unless you start talking to each other and say, okay, hey, this is how I, as an operation user, as an operator, am going to consume the tech. And then here, as a tech person, I can deploy this tech. Unless you get those conversations together, the ability to make the technology work for you is going to be limited, and then we're going to run into these friction points downstream. And then finally, the operating model. We still see a lot of misplaced KPIs in the industry. Technology teams are getting measured differently. The operators are getting measured differently. Technologies are all about, okay, get the next cool generation tech out, get my data on cloud, get my utilization of AI up, put AI and Copilot in the hands of all of my people. But what if you make it accessible but nobody's using it? So how do we align some of those metrics? And this is some of the ways that we think, right? So in the current operating model, what you see is the business operations, as I said earlier, we get measured very differently. We get measured by KPIs like process automation. How do you implement Lean Six Sigma? How do we think of process re-engineering? Our technology teams, the dev and IT ops, they get measured very differently. They're thinking about technology, IT automation. How do I deploy business software? How do I enable network and security? The real operating model that's going to create value is when you bring these together, which is where the tech-infused business operations kind of works, or the DevOps-led technology kind of works together. And what you're trying to do is, instead of creating separate outcomes being measured separately, create one goals. This is what we call as the objectives and key results, OKRs. So what are those OKRs for the organizations at a C-suite level, aligning towards those and saying, okay, hey, if I'm going to deploy tech, it can't just be for the sake of it. It has to be a business consumption metric associated with a lot of those things. Okay, and I think that pretty much wraps it up. Any questions, answers at this point? If you think about from your own experience perspective, the technology and operations teams kind of coming together, any specific call-outs, what in your experience has worked, not worked? Are the ops and tech teams starting to talk together, or do we still see a little bit of that divide across the industry? I know I see that every day, so I'm just curious to see what this group feels. Are most of the folks here from more of an operator background or more from a technology background? Operators? More operators and technologists? It's about a 70-30 mix. So let me ask the technologists first. What would you rather hear from the operators differently? I saw a few hands go up. So as a technologist, as you're thinking of deploying technology, what would you want the business consumers to do differently than what they're doing today so that we can create some of these outcomes? Any things that come to mind? Anything that you believe has either worked in your organization or hasn't worked or has limited the adoption of technology?
Yeah, okay. One thing, my experience has been on the health plan side and in healthcare. And coming to smart data, there was a language, I don't want to really say it was a gap, but there is a different language that is spoken between tech and operations. And that has been a really a steep learning curve for me, because how I speak about operations and how I speak about what I think needs to happen doesn't necessarily translate the way that I want it to tech. So I think that that's been part of it, is that communication and making sure that both sides understand the nuances of each specialty. So, and one thing that I've noticed, we have some incredible tech specialists with us, and they have done an amazing job of helping me learn how to communicate better and also to identify what I'm trying to say in order to make it work. So.
Thank you. Can we have a mic here? Thanks.
Your 85% POCs stuck. Your 85% of POCs that are stuck. I wonder how much of that is operations, business community. No offense to you all, because I'm also one of them. Is the whole concept of AI is you start with a dumb solution that learns. And so you roll it out, you get not stellar feedback. It's wrong more times than a human. And you flush it, stop it, kill it. There's no ROI in going backwards, which I understand completely. But I just wonder how much of those 85% of initiatives that got stuck in POC just didn't get enough time to learn to be smarter than a human and be more effective than a human.
So let me ask that. We have enough operators in the room. So let me ask that question, right? So we saw this chart. There's enough. I think the question here is there's a lot of POCs that are getting killed, but how much of that was really the lack of either the ROI existing versus the tech just needed more time to mature? So as an operator, when you think about, okay, some of the AI tools, generative AI tools that have been exposed to you, and it's taking time, what goes through your mind? That, okay, this is not work. When it's still early days, something you got your hands on, what's the first things that come to mind? How do you take a decision, okay, hey, what are you going to use, what are you not going to use? Do you just kill it right up front? Are there things that you got to be more patient with? So as an operator, what would make you stick with the technology a little longer? Any point of views? These are the sample use cases. You can have your own. But anybody who's experimented with this, especially things that, as an operator that you like, what did you like about the tools that really worked? What were the differentiators? Any experiences that somebody wants to share? Okay.
What we have done is we have done very extended POCs, because there are two things, right? I think with AIs, there's a sense of it's 80% accurate, you should just go with it. Doesn't work for us as payers. CMS does not like that. It really does like you being 100% correct all the time. So we have very purposefully extended our POCs. So we're doing a agent assist POC for an AI, and we're doing it extensively over 8 months, adding more and more agents to it to really make sure the program's learning. And also we're not putting ourselves at the risk. And I think that's where I think sometimes tech's right, like you just gotta assume this is going to be a long POC period before we get to proof of scale.
So what would help you become more patient with tech? So in your words, you're saying if we started in a small sandbox, we're slowly expanding it, what would you need to see change so that you would stick with it longer, you would be more committed towards using tech in the long term?
I think it's both from a leadership standpoint. As leaders of the company, you just have to say this thing is going to have a long proving period out, so you're not going to see your ROI until you get to your proof of scale. But the other thing is, I'm a product owner, so I actually bridge the gap between the two, right? Is also from the tech side is it's a new shiny tool, but we got to be a little bit more careful with it. And I think going back to your security and layers is really understanding it and also making sure that we keep iterating the models until we get to a higher percentage of accuracy.
So that brings up an interesting question. As operators, what's our incentive, or how do we get measured? If the tech works or doesn't work, what do you get measured against? What's your incentive to kind of stick with the technology? Or is there one? It's cost. Yeah, that's. Who here cares about costs? So I think the thesis is that the technology is eventually going to help you to reduce the cost. It's just that you'll have to be a lot more patient with it. And during that transition period, how do you kind of, I think, get the leadership aligned? How do you get that buy-in from the leaders and say, if I'm going to do this, I really want to make sure that I'm not going to get hit against my KPIs. CMS is not going to be on my back asking for a bunch of regulatory submissions. Well, they are going to be. I don't think you can control CMS. But how do I have that separate layer? How do I do this in a sandboxing environment? Doesn't hurt my day-to-day KPIs, allow me to test out the tech, allow me to make it work. Once it's efficient enough, some of the tech stuff takes over, and I free up some of my operation teams to do things that they really care about. Okay. Any other questions, answers? Otherwise, I think we're almost at the end of time. Okay, done. Thanks everyone. Hopefully this was informative.